Hey there. Forget the fairy tale version of the Renaissance you may have heard in school. The truth is darker, quieter, and, if you listen closely, strangely comforting. Tonight, you will hear about 3 small horrors that helped wake a sleeping world. A library, where the floorboards hide old bones. A book rescued from dust like a stolen relic. And a city that bought beauty with the soft, invisible violence of debt. If you find a little peace inside this gentle darkness, leave a like, subscribe, and let this candlelit room become a place you return to when the world feels too loud. Now, lower the brightness on your screen if you can. Let your shoulders loosen. Let your jaw unclench. Take a slow breath in and let it go as if it weighs nothing at all. Imagine the crackle of a fire nearby. Imagine a single candle, its flame steady, patient, as if it has all the time in the world. It is a cold January morning in the year 1417. Not the kind of cold that simply stings the cheeks, but the kind that settles into stone and stays there. The kind that turns a corridor into a long, pale throat of air. The kind that makes your fingertips feel slightly unreal as they fumble with a cloak clasp. I always find it a little strange, honestly, how silence can have a temperature. You know that feeling, don't you? When you step into a place where sound has been swallowed for centuries, and your own breathing suddenly feels too bright, too alive. That is the silence in a German monastery, deep inland, far from the lively markets of Italy, far from the warm smell of bread and wine. Here the air tastes like damp wood and old smoke, and the walls hold a faint mineral scent, like wet slate. The monastery library is not grand. It is not a palace of knowledge with marble and gold. It is a room made to endure. Thick beams, narrow windows, dust that lies in layers like soft ash, shelves that creak when you touch them, as if the wood itself is remembering every hand that has passed. A man stands among those shelves, shoulders hunched against the chill. He is an Italian scholar, and the name history gives him is Poggio Bracciolini. You can picture him in a heavy coat that never feels quite warm enough. His boots track in a faint pattern of melted snow. His breath appears, then fades, then appears again. Each time he exhales, it is like the room answers with a colder breath of its own. Poggio has been searching for weeks, not for jewels, not for coins, not for the kind of treasure that glitters. He has been hunting words. There is a particular hunger that lives in scholars, a hunger that can be more stubborn than thirst. It is not dramatic. It does not roar. It simply keeps returning, like a quiet tapping at the back of the skull. A question that will not let you sleep. A line of thought that keeps turning over in the mind the way a pebble turns under a slow tide. And in 1417, the hunger for old words is beginning to spread through certain circles in Europe like a secret fever. Not everyone feels it. Most people are busy surviving winter, measuring their days in bread and firewood. But a few, a rare few, feel pulled towards something older than their own lives. Poggio runs his fingers along a spine, then another. The leather is cracked, the titles faded. Some volumes are wrapped in cloth. Some are chained, not because anyone thinks a thief will come, but because books are precious in a world that has lost so many of them. He moves slowly, because haste makes dust rise. Dust makes him cough. A cough in a silent library feels like a sin. He squints toward the window. The daylight is thin, reluctant. It slips through the glass and lands in pale rectangles on the floor. In those rectangles, dust motes drift like tiny ghosts, floating without urgency. I always feel, in places like this, as if time has layers. The present is just the top skin. Beneath it are other mornings, other winters, other men walking the same boards. If you were to lift a floor plank, you might find nothing but darkness and cobwebs, or you might find, as Poggio likely knew, the hidden remains of those who died and were buried quickly when sickness moved through these communities. And sickness did move through Europe, again and again. Even more than a century after the Black Death tore through the continent, killing in such numbers that people stopped counting, the memory of it still shaped how a room felt. It shaped how a stranger's cough sounded. It shaped how a monastery stored its dead. So yes, the floorboards can hide bones, not as a Gothic story, as a practical choice made in a desperate time. The dead did not always have time for proper graves. Poggio shifts his weight, and the board beneath him gives a soft groan. He pauses, as if listening for something to respond. Nothing does. He continues, shelf after shelf, titles in Latin, half-remembered names, a few works of theology, copied and recopied, their margins dense with notes, a sermon here, a legal treatise there. Then, in a corner where the light barely reaches, a stack of neglected volumes, their bindings swollen from damp. He draws one out carefully. It resists, like it does not want to be disturbed. The wood of the shelf grips it. The leather makes a small sound as it slides free, a whispering scrape. Poggio's hands tighten, not with fear, but with attention, reverence, almost. The book is heavier than it looks. It smells of mold and ink and something faintly metallic. Iron gall ink, perhaps, made from oak galls and vitriol. Ink that bites into parchment. Ink that can survive when flesh cannot. He opens it. The hinge of the binding complains. The pages are thick, uneven, a little stiff from cold. He turns one. The sound is soft, like dry leaves. At first, it is just text, lines and lines of Latin, orderly and calm. Then his eyes catch a name, Lucretius, and just like that, the air changes. Not because the room is different, but because Poggio is different. Because a thought has landed in him with the quiet weight of a stone. Lucretius was a Roman poet and philosopher. The work in Poggio's hands is a long poem on the nature of things, a meditation on the world, on matter, on fear, on the soul. It carries the philosophy of Epicurus, a way of thinking that, to certain minds in Poggio's Florence, will feel like contraband. Not illegal in the way of swords, dangerous in the way of ideas, because ideas can loosen the grip of old fears. And sometimes, when fear loosens, power trembles. Poggio stands there, turning a page, then another, scanning the lines. His fingers leave faint marks in the dust on the margins. He reads not like a man savoring poetry, but like a man checking the edge of a knife, testing its sharpness, feeling the shape of what it could cut. I always feel a shiver at this moment in history. Not a dramatic one, just a small recognition that so much can hinge on such a quiet act. A man finding a book, a hand making a copy, a page being carried across mountains. We do not know what happened to the original manuscript Poggio found. It may have been lost again. It may have rotted. It may have been destroyed, intentionally or by accident, because paper and parchment are so fragile against the long appetite of damp. But we do know that Poggio copied it, and copies lead to more copies, a chain of ink, hand to hand. Picture that copying, if you like. A candle on a desk, the flame trembling when a draft sneaks in under a door. Poggio's eyes sore from staring, his wrist aching. The steady scratch of a quill, each letter formed carefully, because a mistake is not just a mistake. It is a fracture in transmission. It is a crack in the vessel, carrying the past into the present. Outside, the monastery sleeps. The wind presses its cold face to the window. Somewhere in a corridor, a monk's footsteps pass, slow and measured, like prayer made into sound. Inside, the past is being unburied. And now, as you rest here beside the imagined fire, I want you to hold on to one gentle idea. The Renaissance did not begin as a parade of geniuses. It began as a scavenging, a careful picking through the ruins of earlier worlds. a search for fragments. Fragments of Greece, fragments of Rome, fragments of thought that had survived plague, war, neglect, and the simple cruelty of time. And the people who loved those fragments, they were not saints, not heroes in shining paint. They were ambitious. They were hungry. Sometimes they were vain. Sometimes they were kind. Often, they were both in the same breath. Poggio closes the book for a moment, as if he needs to feel its weight, to remind himself it is real. The cover is cold. The corners are worn smooth by hands long dead. He looks at the shelves around him, as if they are suddenly full of hidden doors. He has found one treasure. How many more are there? When he returns to Italy, to Florence, this discovery will slide into a wider movement already stirring. A meeting of minds, artists, philosophers, architects, wealthy patrons who commission and advise, scientists, explorers, playwrights, musicians. A cultural rebirth that will last roughly 300 years and leave fingerprints on everything we call modern. But for now, we stay in the quiet. We stay with a man and a book and a winter morning, because this is how history often changes, not with thunder, with a page turning. Let your breathing slow again, in and out. In the next part, we will leave the monastery and travel, gently, toward a city that learned to turn money into marble, a city that polished itself into beauty because it believed beauty could make people better, a city called Florence. And beneath the beauty, there is always a shadow. There is always a cost. Listen to the fire. Let the sound blur. We are going to walk into that city very slowly. The road to Florence is not a single road. It is a weave of paths, like threads pulled through a loom. If you close your eyes, you can almost feel the change in the air as you move south. The German winter loosens its grip, little by little. The cold becomes less like a locked door and more like a heavy curtain. The light grows warmer. The smell of pine gives way to the scent of damp earth, then to the sharper, sweeter smells of towns where people cook with herbs and smoke their meats in narrow alleys. Travel, in the 15th century, is never just travel. It is waiting. It is listening. It is measuring distances in soreness. A horse's breath steams in the morning. Leather straps creak. Wheels thump over ruts. Mud clings to boots and dries into crust. At night, when you lie down, you can still feel the rocking of motion in your bones, as if your body refuses to believe it is still. And sometimes, when I imagine this journey, I cannot help thinking about what else moves along these roads. Not just scholars and merchants, but rumors, news of wars, whispers of plague returning, the quiet fear that sits under every handshake. Because even though the great wave of the Black Death had passed more than a century earlier, it never truly left Europe. It returned in smaller surges. It lingered in the stories people told their children. It lived in the way towns reacted to strangers. It lived in the way a mother watched her child's cough. So when you arrive in Florence, you do not arrive in a bright painting. You arrive in a living city, breathing, sweating, working. A city that remembers graves. Florence, in the 15th century, is an independent city-state, officially a republic. That word, republic, sounds clean, orderly. It suggests votes and councils and civic virtue. But you know how it is, don't you? Words can be polite masks. Under a polite mask, there is a face. Under a face, there is bone. Florence is rich. That is the first thing you feel. Not as a number on a ledger, but as a texture in the air. Richness has a smell. Wool dye, tanning vats, hot metal, fresh bread, and the sharp tang of coins passed between fingers all day. You walk down a street paved with stone that has been worn smooth by thousands of souls. Above you, the buildings rise close, leaning in as if they want to hear your thoughts. Laundry hangs from windows. A merchant shouts a price. Somewhere, a hammer strikes iron with a steady rhythm. like a heartbeat for the neighborhood. And then there is the river, the Arno, moving through the city with its own slow confidence. Water always makes me think of time. It carries reflections. It carries waste. It carries, sometimes, things people do not want to see. On certain mornings, when fog lies low over the water, the river looks like a pale ribbon, and the city seems to float above it. Beautiful, yes, and yet I always feel a small unease when beauty and power live too close together. Because beauty can distract, it can lull, it can make you forget to ask who paid for the stones under your feet. In Florence, one of the families who paid is the Medici. Their story begins not in a chapel or a studio, but in a bank. In 1397, the Medici Bank opens. It is not a dramatic opening. No trumpets, no parade, just a door, a table, a set of ledgers, a few trained minds, and a willingness to lend. Banking in this era is a quiet kind of influence. It does not wear armor. It does not wave a banner. It sits behind a desk and smiles and offers terms. And terms are where the darkness hides. Because debt is a soft chain. It does not clank. It tightens without noise. It can pull a nobleman's pride down into the mud while his face stays composed at dinner. It can make a king's court bow to a banker without ever admitting it. The Medici are good at this. Very good. Their branches spread like roots. Venice, Rome, Geneva, then further, England, France, Belgium. The names sound distant, like stars. But each branch is a room somewhere, with a desk and an inkpot and a man counting. I can almost hear that counting. Coins placed in piles, the faint ring of metal, the scratch of a stylus, the slow, steady breathing of someone whose entire life is the management of other people's needs. The Medici lend to the elite, royal courts, nobles, entrepreneurs. The sums are large. The risks are real. If a king cannot pay, it is not just money that vanishes. It is stability. It is reputation. It is power. So the Medici learn to make themselves necessary. They learn to be the hand that holds the ladder while others climb. By the mid-15th century, their bank is regarded across the continent as the most highly respected lender. Reputation, in finance, is almost like holiness. People place faith in it. They fear its loss. Wealth accumulates. Then it begins to change shape. It turns into political sway. And here is the part that always feels eerie to me. Not because it is supernatural, but because it is so human. The way a city can call itself a republic while one family quietly holds its throat. Cosimo de' Medici is the figure who makes this possible. Officially, Cosimo holds no crowned title. He is not a king. He does not sit on a throne in public. He does not need to. He sits behind the scenes, where decisions can be steered with a word and a payment and a well-timed favor. A pope once said of him that he was king in all but name. Imagine that. A pope, a man surrounded by ritual and authority, acknowledging that real power can live somewhere else entirely, in a counting house. Cosimo builds a network of loyalty. He lends money. He forgives debts. He funds projects. He supports friends. He ruins enemies quietly, not with swords but with access. He can make a career bloom or wither by opening or closing a door. And yet, this is the strange twist of the Renaissance. The same machinery that can crush people can also lift art into the light. It is tempting to make Cosimo a villain or a hero. The truth is more complicated. His money is a tool. In the right hands, a tool builds. In the wrong hands, it breaks. Often, it does both. Cosimo uses his wealth to sponsor artists and architects, poets and scholars, philosophers and orators. He collects ancient manuscripts, not only out of curiosity, but because he believes the past can be mined for guidance. Greece and Rome become mirrors. Florence stares into them. searching for a better self. But before we reach the marble courtyards and the calm geometry, I want you to linger a little longer in the banking rooms, because that is where the mood of the city is set. Picture the interior of a Florentine bank. The door opens onto a space that smells of wax and ink and wool. The light is dim, filtered through shutters. The walls are plain. The furniture is sturdy. This is not a place for ornament. Ornament is for churches and palaces, for the visible world. Here, function rules. A clerk sits at a table. His fingers are stained dark from ink. His eyes are tired in the way of people who read numbers all day. He writes carefully, because a misplaced mark could ripple outward and ruin someone. A client enters. A nobleman, perhaps, with fine cloth that smells faintly of perfume. Or a merchant with calloused hands. They speak quietly, not because they are polite, but because money conversations are always private. They negotiate. There is a moment, always, where the borrower tries to preserve dignity. He tries to speak as if he does not need this, as if he is simply choosing a convenient option. And the banker, if he is skilled, lets him keep that dignity, because a humiliated man becomes an enemy. A satisfied man becomes a returning customer. The contract is agreed. The quill moves. The ink dries. A seal is pressed. A coin pouch changes hands, heavy and warm from someone else's body, and the chain tightens. This is the invisible violence I promised you in the first minutes. Not blood on stone, something quieter, the kind of violence that makes people betray their values, the kind that makes families whisper at night about what they owe, the kind that makes a city shape itself around the interests of those who can lend. If you listen carefully, you can almost hear it beneath the city's usual sounds, the faint anxiety that rides with every trade, every gamble, every ambitious plan. Florence is full of ambition. It is a city that wants to become something greater than itself. The streets are crowded with craftsmen, builders, apprentices carrying boards, stonecutters, dusted white, artists' assistants hauling pigment, scholars moving with their heads down, as if protecting a thought from the wind. It is easy, from a distance, to romanticize this, but up close, it is labor, it is ache, it is competition, it is jealousy, it is the constant pressure of reputation. An artist needs patrons. A patron wants glory. A bank can supply the patron, so the bank becomes the hidden heartbeat of beauty. I always feel a little sadness here, mixed with admiration, because it means that some of the world's most soothing, orderly buildings were born from the restless, hungry side of human nature, from power games, from fear of losing status, from a desire to be remembered. Even philanthropy can have a shadow, and yet the results can still be beautiful. Cosimo lays the groundwork for successors who will dominate Florentine politics for years. He sets an example. Spend money on the city. Spend money on ideas. Spend money on stone and paint, so the city itself becomes a lesson. He is said to have found more pleasure in spending money than earning it. That line always makes me pause, because spending can look generous, but it can also be strategic. It can buy love. It can buy silence. It can buy immortality. Now, settle your mind on a single image, a coin resting on a palm. On one side, it is just metal, cold, hard, honest in its simplicity. On the other side, it is a promise, a lever, a way to move people without touching them. In the next part, we will see what Cosimo and his architects do with that lever, how they turn money into courtyards, columns, facades that soothe the eye, how they try to cure public squalor with public beauty. And we will keep our gentle attention on the shadow too, the cost, the quiet bargains. For now, let your breathing slow again. Listen to the imagined fire. Let the city sounds fade to a distant murmur, like water behind a wall. We are still approaching Florence, very slowly, one careful step at a time. In Florence, stone does not simply sit where it is placed. It speaks. If you stand in the narrow street just outside the Medici Quarter, and you let yourself be still for a moment, you can hear the city doing what cities always do. Bargaining, breathing, rushing, whispering. There is the clatter of hooves over uneven paving. There is the squeal of a cartwheel that needs grease. There is the wet slap of laundry as someone shakes it out of a window above you, and the sudden, sharp scent of lye soap drifting down like a clean insult to the muddy street. And then, threaded through it all, the quieter sound that I always notice first in old places, the sound of stone being worked, a chisel's crisp tap, a mallet's dull answer, the tiny rain of dust falling from a newly cut edge. Those sounds are soft, almost gentle, but they are relentless, and they remind you that the Renaissance was not only painted, it was built. It was hammered into shape, day after day, by hands that blistered and bled. Cosimo de' Medici wanted Florence to look like an idea. That sentence feels odd, I know. Cities usually look like accidents, like layers of decisions made in haste, patched over by the next generation. But here, the ambition was different. There was a belief, shared by the wealthy and the learned, that surroundings could mold souls, that if you built order into stone, you might coax order into people. It sounds almost tender, until you remember who gets to decide what order means. Because order can be a lullaby, and it can also be a leash. Cosimo's money moved through Florence like a current. It flowed into contracts, into wages, into shipments of marble. It flowed into the mouths of builders and into the dreams of artists. It also flowed into politics, quietly, as if politics were just another room with a desk and an inkpot. And so, in the center of the city, a building rose that was both shelter and statement. The Palazzo Medici. Try to imagine it before it becomes a postcard, before tourists stand with their mouths slightly open. Imagine it as fresh stone, still pale, still smelling faintly of the quarry. Imagine the street around it crowded with scaffolding, with men shouting measurements, with apprentices carrying buckets of lime. The air would have that chalky bite, the one that dries your lips. Your shoes would pick up grit, and it would crunch under your heel with every step. The architect was a young man named Michelozzo. Young, but not naive. Michelozzo had studied ancient Roman architecture the way some people study scripture. He knew the language of arches and columns. He knew the calm authority of symmetry. He knew that a building could make a person stand a little straighter without knowing why. And the palazzo's facade, it is not flamboyant. That is part of its power. The stone blocks are heavy, rusticated at the base, rough-faced like a clenched fist. Above, the stone becomes smoother, more refined. It is a tripartite design, 3 horizontal bands, like a lesson, from raw strength to controlled strength to polished strength. When I picture it at night, I always picture the way torchlight would catch those stones. The rough lower blocks would throw uneven shadows, little pockets of darkness where dust and damp could hide. The upper stones would reflect the light more cleanly, as if the building were trying to rise out of its own gloom. Inside, a central courtyard opens like a secret breath. Courtyards are strange, aren't they? From the street, you see a wall, a guarded face. Then you step through a doorway, and suddenly there is air. There is light. There is an echo that feels different, softer. The courtyard of the Palazzo Medici was arranged with care. Corinthian columns, marble pathways, sculptures placed for viewing. Donatello's works, at times, standing there like living presences turned to stone. I always feel something almost eerie when I think of sculptures in a private courtyard. Public art invites a crowd. Private art invites control. It means beauty can be owned. It means a family can decide who gets to see virtue carved into marble and who must stay outside in the mud. And yet, if you were a young artist in Florence, stepping into that courtyard for the first time, you might have felt your throat tighten with awe. You might have felt honestly, like you were entering the center of a dream. The stone cool beneath your fingertips, the faint trickle of water from a fountain, the smell of damp marble after rain, the soft scuff of your own shoes on the decorative pathways. You might have looked up and seen the sky framed by geometry, a square of blue above, held in place by ordered lines, as if even the heavens could be persuaded to behave. Cosimo commissioned the palazzo not just for comfort, but for a message. We are stable. We are refined. We are Rome reborn. And from that one jewel, others followed. Walk with me, slowly, through Florence. Not in a hurry, not like a guide racing through landmarks. We will drift, the way your mind drifts when you are close to sleep, noticing small things. A street corner where a mason's tools are laid out like surgical instruments. A pile of chips at the base of a wall, white as bone. A young boy carrying a plank longer than he is tall, his face set with concentration. A woman at a window shaking crumbs from a cloth, feeding invisible birds. And then, turning a corner, you see a church facade that looks like someone tried to freeze music into stone. Santa Maria Novella. The church itself dated back to the late 13th century, older than this new wave of ambition, but its facade, its face, was completed later, in 1470, under the hand of Leon Battista Alberti. Alberti was not only an architect, he was a thinker, an artist, a philosopher, a man of the Renaissance in the truest sense, carrying multiple worlds in his mind. When you imagine him, you can imagine ink on his fingers and dust on his shoes. You can imagine him standing back from the facade, narrowing his eyes, measuring with his gaze the way a musician measures intervals. The facade is made of green and white marble, arranged in geometric patterns that feel almost soothing if you let your eyes follow them. Circles and squares, lines that meet with clean confidence. Archways at the base, reaching identical heights, positioned symmetrically around the main door. There is a calm in that symmetry, a kind of mental hush. I always find it fascinating and a little unsettling that beauty can be engineered to soothe. That if you place shapes in the right ratios, you can quiet the mind the way a lullaby does. Because if you can soothe the mind, you can also steer it. Florence began to fill with similar buildings, elegant churches, cathedrals, fountains in squares, their water catching sunlight like scattered glass, colonnaded arcades at the base of some structures, creating sheltered walkways where people could stroll out of rain or avoid the harsh summer heat. And as you stroll, your footsteps echo under those arches. The sound is rhythmic, comforting. Your breath slows. You feel, in your body, the intention of the design. The ancient Greeks and Romans had made architecture into a kind of science. They wrote down rules and systems. Renaissance architects could consult manuscripts and treatises and find inspiration not only for decoration, but for proportion itself. They developed their own rule sets, formulas, ratios, aesthetic guidelines. The facade should be relatively plain, reflecting order through the positioning of windows. A courtyard might hold a fountain at its center, topped with marble sculptures, like a heart. And here, in the background, is a voice from ancient Rome, Sallust. Sallust wrote about a recurring problem, public squalor and private opulence. The idea was simple and sharp. If the public sphere is ugly, the rich retreat into private luxury, and society fractures. If the public sphere is beautiful, refined, opulent, the rich are tempted outside, and citizens share a common pride. It sounds almost civic-minded, but listen closely, and you can hear the self-interest too. A beautiful city is safer for the wealthy. A proud citizen is easier to govern than a desperate one. So patrons like the Medici believed people were shaped by surroundings. Public squalor might bring out cruelty. Public beauty might encourage higher virtues. A city, in this view, becomes a moral instrument. Now, if you are half asleep, let that idea settle gently. Imagine walking through Florence at dusk, the sky fading to violet, the marble facades cooling, their colors deepening, the air smelling of smoke from cooking fires, and a faint sweetness from crushed grapes if it is harvest season. You pass a fountain, water murmurs, a child laughs somewhere, then the sound is swallowed by a stone wall. A man in a cloak hurries by, his face unreadable in the dim light. Perhaps he is just going home. Perhaps he is carrying a message that will ruin someone. Because while Florence polished itself into harmony, politics still ran underneath like dark water. Cosimo's influence was not always gentle. Rival families watched him, feared him, envied him. In a city that called itself a republic, power could be contested, and contests could turn vicious. A ruined reputation could be a kind of death. Exile was a slow suffocation, and sometimes, when alliances failed, men did bleed in streets, even if the city preferred to hide the stains behind new stone. So when you stand in the Palazzo courtyard, or when you gaze at Santa Maria Novella's ordered face, remember that order was not a natural state. It was achieved, maintained, protected, sometimes with money, sometimes with favors, sometimes with quiet threats that never reached the public ear. That is the darker undercurrent of the Renaissance's beauty. It was funded by wealth that came from lending, from debt, from the soft chain that could tighten around a king's wrist without anyone hearing it. And yet, the buildings remain. They remain because stone is patient. It outlives the men who quarrel beneath it. It outlives the contracts. It outlives the whispered bargains. If you listen very softly, you can almost hear that patience in the walls, a kind of slow breathing, a steadiness that asks nothing of you except that you keep walking. So keep walking gently. In the next part, we will step away from facades and courtyards and enter the rooms where ideas were discussed, like dangerous perfumes. We will sit at tables where scholars tried to reconcile Plato with Christianity, where art was treated as a vehicle for truth, and where beauty itself became a kind of sermon. For now, let the geometry of Florence soothe you. Let the straight lines calm the restless parts of your mind. Let the fire crackle in the distance, and let the city's shadow stay where it belongs, at the edge of your vision, quiet, waiting. And one more thing, before we leave the streets, think about the hands that made the harmony. A builder wakes before dawn. His room is cold, breath visible. He eats bread that is hard at the edges and softer in the center. He watches his child sleep for a heartbeat longer than he should, because plague taught Florence how quickly a warm body can become silence. Then he walks to the site. Dew slicks the stones. Grit crunches under his heel. Lime dust already hangs in the air like pale fog, and when a block of stone is lowered into place, the sound is a heavy sigh, as if the city itself is settling. And somewhere else, in a quieter room, a clerk writes numbers that decide whether that builder's children will eat next week. Interest, repayment, a name written neatly, then crossed out. Debt is a soft word for a hard thing. At night, Florence changes. Arcades become tunnels of shadow. A watchman calls the hour. Footsteps carry farther. Behind shutters, lamps tremble. Beauty remains, and danger shares the same air. That is why the ordered lines matter. They are an answer to chaos, a spell cast in marble, and spells never come free. If rain begins, the colonnaded arcade is a mercy. Drops strike the street with a sharp, scattered tapping, and the air cools instantly, carrying up the smell of wet stone and old moss. Under the arches, people drift closer together without touching. Cloaks brush. Someone mutters a prayer. Someone laughs softly, trying to pretend the darkness is not there. Water runs in thin ribbons along the gutter, catching bits of straw, bits of dirt, a fallen olive leaf, all of it moving as if the city is washing its memory. Forethought, they called it. Planning. Philosophy made practical. And yet even the best plan cannot stop a shadow from forming when the light shifts. So we walk, and we listen, and we let the hush of proportion settle over us like a warm blanket, while the older, darker currents keep flowing underneath, unseen. The city's buildings can lull you, yes. But the Renaissance was also a thing that happened in rooms, quiet rooms. Rooms where candles burned down to fat puddles, and the air smelled of smoke and warmed wax. Rooms where a table creaked under the weight of manuscripts, and where the scratching of a quill sounded like a tiny animal gnawing at wood. Rooms where men spoke softly, not because they were gentle, but because ideas could be dangerous in a world that still believed some truths belonged only to God. If you have ever held an old book, you know that feeling, that faint tremor, as if you are touching a living thing that has been asleep for centuries. The paper has a smell, slightly sweet, slightly dusty, like dried leaves. The edges feel fragile. You turn a page and it whispers back at you. Now imagine the year 1417, a cold January morning, a German monastery, a library that is more dust than light. Poggio Bracciolini, an Italian scholar, searches along shelves like a man looking for treasure in a cave. His fingers run over spines. His breath fogs in the cold. Somewhere in the building, a monk coughs, the sound swallowed by thick stone walls. Poggio's boots disturb grit on the floor, and each scuff feels loud in the stillness. Weeks pass like that, searching, failing, searching again, and then gold. He finds a manuscript, the only surviving copy of a long-lost poem by the Roman poet and philosopher Lucretius on the nature of things. To someone hungry for classical learning, it is not merely a book, it is a doorway. Lucretius carries the philosophy of Epicurus, and Epicurus, in his calm, unsettling way, suggests that the universe might not be arranged for human comfort, that atoms move, that fear of death can be soothed by understanding nature, that the gods, if they exist, may be distant. In a Christian Europe still haunted by plague and judgment, those ideas were like embers, beautiful embers, dangerous embers. We do not know what happened to the original manuscript Poggio found. History is full of vanishing objects, as if time itself is a thief. But Poggio made a copy. Copies spread, and with each copy, the old world breathed again. Back in Florence, Cosimo de' Medici collected these texts, building what would become the Medici Library. Imagine it, shelves lined with Greek and Roman works, manuscripts that had survived fire, flood, neglect, war, each one a quiet survivor. And around those shelves, the Renaissance humanists began to gather. They did not call themselves humanists the way we do now. To them, it was simply a love of studia humanitatis, grammar, rhetoric, poetry, history, moral philosophy. They believed that by studying the best of the past, a person could become better, more virtuous, more articulate, more capable of serving society. It sounds noble, and it often was. But there is always a shadow. Who gets educated, and who remains outside the circle? Who gets to speak, and who must listen? A philosophy can elevate, and it can also exclude. Cosimo's grandson, Lorenzo de' Medici, would inherit not only wealth, but that atmosphere of curated brilliance. Lorenzo ruled Florence from behind the scenes during a period later called its Golden Age. Behind the scenes is such a gentle phrase, isn't it? It makes power sound like stagecraft. In reality, it means decisions are made in rooms you cannot enter. Lorenzo was called the Magnificent. Names like that are gifts from history, and sometimes they are disguises. He spent lavishly on art. He hosted gatherings of scholars. He involved himself directly in the lives of those he sponsored. Michelangelo, still young, lived with the Medici family for a time. Imagine the boy at the dinner table, hands still rough from stone, eyes absorbing everything. Imagine him listening to debates, while the smell of roasted meat drifted through the room, while servants moved quietly, while the fire popped and sent sparks up the chimney. At that table sat Marsilio Ficino, a Catholic priest and scholar, a leading figure of Renaissance humanism, a man who tried to do something delicate, reconcile Christianity with the philosophy of Plato. Plato's world is full of ideals, forms, a belief that truth exists beyond what the eyes can see. Christianity speaks of a soul, of virtue, of a life beyond this one. Ficino saw similarities. He believed the human soul could be guided toward goodness by knowing certain truths. And art could become a guide, because most people would never read Plato. They would never sit with a manuscript and wrestle with abstract ideas. They were busy surviving. They were busy hauling, cooking, birthing, burying. But they could stand before a painting. They could gaze at a sculpture. They could be moved without knowing why. That is one of the strangest powers humans have. We can be changed by beauty while thinking we are simply enjoying it. So in Florence, art was more than decoration. It was a sermon without words. Botticelli's Birth of Venus is one of the most famous examples. Painted sometime in the 1480s, it shows Venus, the Roman goddess of love, arriving on a shoreline, nude, standing within a massive scallop shell. To her left, the god of wind blows her gently across the water. To her right, a figure often identified as a spring goddess holds out a cloak. In the painting, Venus is both physical and spiritual. Earthly love, divine longing, a body and a symbol. Now, if you let your mind slow, imagine standing before that painting in candlelight. The room smells of oil and varnish. The flame makes the surface shimmer, as if the sea itself is moving. Venus's skin looks luminous, almost too soft to be real. The shell curves around her like a pale cradle. The wind god's cheeks puff, and you can almost feel that breath, cool, salt-laced. And you notice something else, nudity. The Renaissance returned nudity to art in a way Europe had not seen since antiquity. Donatello's David, commissioned by Cosimo de' Medici, was the first freestanding male nude sculpture since ancient times. That fact alone tells you something. It tells you how radically Florence was willing to reshape what could be shown, what could be admired, what could be called virtuous. In a society that prized Christianity, you might expect beauty to be dismissed as vanity. Yet Renaissance artists celebrated physical attractiveness. They used it to draw attention, yes, but also to suggest virtue, to say, this is what courage looks like. This is what grace looks like. This is what moderation might feel like. It is almost like advertising, but the product is an ideal, and ideals can be comforting, and they can be cruel, because when you hold up a perfect image, you also create a quiet pressure to measure yourself against it. You know that feeling, don't you? When you see something flawless, and for a second you feel inspired, and then you feel small. Florence, in its golden age, was full of that double feeling. The beauty lifted people. The beauty also reminded people what they were not. And behind the beauty, the memory of death never fully left. The Black Death had torn through Europe in the mid-14th century. Florence was among the worst affected. Bodies had been carried out of houses. Bells had rung until they sounded meaningless. Streets had fallen silent, except for the wheeled carts of the dead. More than a century later, those shadows still lay in the mind of the city. That is why so many Renaissance works carry layers of mortality beneath their surface, shine. Consider Titian's Three Ages of Man, painted in the early 1500s. In the foreground, children sleep. A handsome couple sits nearby, the man semi-dressed, youth and desire on display. The scene draws you in with warmth. Then your gaze drifts, and you see an aging man contemplating skulls in his hand. A skull is a simple object. Bone, empty sockets, a grin that cannot stop grinning. Yet it can make your stomach tighten, even if you are calm. The painting whispers, life is fleeting. And when you remember plague, that message becomes sharper. It becomes a quiet insistence. Use your time wisely. Live with virtue. Prepare your soul. So art became a mirror that showed beauty so you would keep looking, a mirror that showed death so you would keep thinking. Raphael's school of Athens did something similar for philosophy. Think of that fresco. Ancient thinkers gathered, Aristotle and Plato at the center. Figures captured in motion, dressed in colorful tunics, standing against white marble. You can almost hear their debate echoing through the imagined hall. The philosophers look alive. They look important. They glow with the aura of celebrity, and that glow was persuasive. It said, thinking matters. Curiosity matters. Seek truth. Even Christianity was treated with a new humanity. Bellini's triptych in Venice, completed in 1488, shows the Virgin Mary on a throne, the infant Christ on her lap, baby angels playing music. By then, there were countless depictions of Madonna and child, yet Bellini's feels different. The figures are not stiff. They are tender, a young mother caring for her child. That tenderness draws you closer to the divine, making faith feel intimate rather than distant. And intimacy can be soothing. It can also be powerful, because when you feel close to something holy, you are more willing to shape your life around it. This is the Renaissance's gentle spell. It offered beauty as a path toward truth. It offered order as a path toward virtue. But remember the darker current again. Truth is never neutral. Someone decides which truths are displayed on walls and which are left in dust. The printing press, invented by Gutenberg in the mid-15th century, would soon amplify everything. Written music, theology, philosophy, literature, science. Ideas that once lived only in elite rooms could begin to travel. That travel was thrilling. It was also unsettling. Because once an idea leaves the room, it cannot be fully controlled. It can inspire reform. It can inspire rebellion. It can fracture a church. It can split a city. So when you imagine those candlelit gatherings in Florence, imagine also the tension under the calm voices. Scholars speaking of Plato, yes, but also watching each other's faces, measuring what can be safely said. Artists smiling, yes, but also aware that patronage is a kind of dependence, and dependence can turn beauty into obligation. Still, in the midst of all that, there were moments of genuine wonder. A young sculptor running his hand over a newly carved marble shoulder, feeling the coolness, the smoothness, the way stone can pretend to be flesh. A poet reading a line from Cicero and feeling his mind widen. A composer hearing two melodies intertwine in polyphony and feeling as if the world itself has become richer. If you are listening as you drift toward sleep, let those moments be your focus. Let the candlelight soften the hard edges. Let the sound of a page turning slow your breath. Let the idea of a city full of thinkers and artists become a quiet room in your mind. And as we continue, we will follow that quiet room outward, across Europe, into courts and cathedrals, into voyages and revolutions, into the way a rebirth can carry both light and shadow. For now, rest in the glow of the candle. Rest in the hush of painted seas and marble halls. Rest, even while the darker truths remain, patient and gentle, like a hand on your shoulder. I always imagine one particular evening. The Medici dining room is warm, almost too warm, because the fire has been fed generously. You can hear sap popping in the logs. You can smell citrus peel tossed into the flames, releasing a bitter sweetness. Servants move with practiced silence, setting down dishes, withdrawing again, like shadows that know their place. Ficino speaks, and his voice is calm, the way a priest's voice can be calm when he is certain he is guiding souls. He describes Plato's ladder of love, how a person might begin with admiration for a beautiful body and rise, step by step, toward love of beauty itself, then toward love of truth, then toward God. His hands make small, careful gestures, as if he is shaping the air. Someone at the table laughs softly at a clever phrase. Someone else goes quiet, eyes lowered, perhaps thinking of a brother lost to plague years ago, perhaps thinking of sin, perhaps thinking of debt. Michelangelo listens. The boy's fingers flex under the table, not impatient, more like a musician testing a chord. He is imagining stone. He is imagining a figure trapped inside it, waiting, and in a corner of the room, a candle gutters. The wick bends. Smoke curls upward in a thin, wavering thread, and for a moment the flame seems to hesitate. Then it steadies again. That is how the Renaissance feels to me. A flame that wavers, threatened by drafts of politics, religion, mortality, and yet it keeps burning, quiet and stubborn. Tonight, let's leave Florence by way of sound. That might seem like a strange road to take. Most stories of the Renaissance begin with paintings and buildings, with marble and fresco, and names that shine like polished coins. Yet if you close your eyes, if you let the images fade until they become soft silhouettes, what remains is often a kind of music, a hum beneath the century, a slow, braided melody made of voices, ink, wood, breath. I always feel a little shiver, honestly, when I picture the first time a piece of written music traveled farther than its composer ever could. Because before printing, music lived like a fragile animal. It survived in memory, in trained throats, in the careful copying of notes by candlelight. A choir might learn a mass and pass it from one generation to the next like an heirloom. One mistake, one forgotten phrase, and the melody could change, quietly, without anyone noticing. Then the printing press arrived, and suddenly melodies could multiply. Gutenberg's invention in the mid-15th century did not only change books, it changed the speed of ideas, the way knowledge moved through Europe like a tide that could no longer be held back by a single hand. Written music, printed and distributed, allowed musicians in different countries to share a common language. A melody composed in one city might be sung in another, across mountains, across borders, across the slow, dangerous roads where bandits waited, and winter could freeze a traveler to stillness. Picture a sheet of music fresh from a press. The ink is dark and slightly raised. The paper smells of pulp and oil. If you run a finger gently over the notes, you can feel the faint texture, like tiny bumps. The staves are straight lines that promise order. The notes sit on them like seeds placed with intention, waiting for a voice to bring them to life. And then, polyphony. Two or more voices, each with its own independent melody, interweaving. It is a strange miracle, polyphony. Each line is complete in itself, and yet together they form something richer, a tapestry of sound. It can make you feel as though the world is deeper than you realized, that there are layers to reality you cannot see but can somehow hear. At night, in a chapel, polyphony would rise into the rafters and linger. Candle flames would tremble with the vibrations. Wax would drip in slow, lazy rivulets down the side of a candle, pooling like pale tears. The stone walls would hold the sound and give it back, softened, as if the building itself were singing. If you have ever stood in a large empty room while someone sings, you know the feeling. The voice seems to grow larger than the body that makes it. It fills corners. It brushes your skin like a warm draft. It can make your chest feel tight, not from fear, but from a kind of quiet awe. Renaissance composers believed their talent was a divine loan, something to be repaid through service to God. Josquin des Prez, Giovanni Pierluigi da Palestrina, William Byrd. Names that still carry weight. Their music was meant to make the world sound sweeter, to lift the mind toward virtue, to wrap human anxiety in harmony. And yet, even here, there is a shadow, because sacred music was also a kind of power. A choir could move a congregation to tears. A melody could persuade people that the church was beautiful, holy, necessary, even when the institution itself was tangled in greed and corruption. It is an uncomfortable thought, the way beauty can be used as a veil. I don't say that to make you tense. Let it be a soft, distant awareness, like thunder, far away. You can listen to the rain without needing to run. Now imagine a winter evening in northern Europe, far from Florence. A small church, cold stone, the smell of damp wool and smoke. Villagers crowd together, their breath visible. Someone's hands are red from work in the fields, knuckles cracked. A child leans against a mother's skirt, half asleep. The priest lifts his hands, and the choir begins. The first notes are tentative, like a candle being lit. Then the voices gather strength. One line rises, another answers. The sound grows, and in that moment, the villagers are not thinking of hunger, or illness, or debt. They are held by harmony. That is one way the Renaissance traveled, not only through books and paintings, but through the body itself, through the physical sensation of being surrounded by ordered sound. And order, again, is both comfort and constraint. If we stay with sound a little longer, we can feel how the Renaissance encouraged experimentation. Instrumental music began to flourish. Early forms of opera would eventually emerge, where stories were sung into being, as if myth and history could be carried on breath. The idea of a common musical language is gentle, almost hopeful. People of different regions, different tongues, sharing the same notes. Yet it also hints at something else, the slow shaping of Europe into a more connected, more competitive world. When knowledge spreads, it does not only inspire, it also provokes. It makes people compare themselves. It makes rulers hungry to keep up. And while music was being printed and shared, another kind of knowledge was being pursued with a darker intimacy, the human body. For centuries, much medical theory in Europe leaned on authority rather than observation. Galen's ideas about the four humors had endured, long held and rarely questioned. Blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. A tidy model that promised to explain illness the way a simple story explains a complex life. Then the Renaissance arrived with its restless curiosity. Some people began to look, to test, to cut. There is no gentle way to say that dissection is unsettling, even when done in the name of learning. It carries a hush of taboo, a body opened, skin parted, the smell that rises, sharp and iron sweet, the cold gleam of a blade, the quiet concentration on a face that is trying to be clinical, trying not to think of the person who once lived inside that flesh. I always feel strange when I think about it, because it is both reverent and invasive. It is a search for truth that requires violating what many considered sacred. Aelius, the physician from Brussels, would publish works that revealed the mysteries of human anatomy, challenging older assumptions. And Leonardo da Vinci, in his own obsessive way, would study bodies too, making drawings so precise they still feel alive. Leonardo is often presented as a luminous figure, a genius painted in bright colors. Yet there is a darker room behind that light. Picture him at night, alone, with a candle. The flame throws a small circle of light over a table. Beyond that circle, the room is black. You can hear the faint scratch of his pen. You can smell oil and paper and the metallic tang of blood. His hands are steady. His mind is hungry. He draws muscle and tendon with the tenderness of a lover and the detachment of a scientist. He looks at the human form and sees not only beauty, but mechanism. How joints hinge, how lungs inflate, how veins branch like rivers. Outside, Florence sleeps. A dog barks once, then stops. Somewhere, a drunk man laughs. Somewhere, a sick man coughs until his throat burns. Inside, Leonardo keeps drawing, as if he is trying to outpace death by understanding it. And that is another thread of the Renaissance, the quiet rebellion against ignorance. Some called it a scientific revolution. People began to question truths that had been accepted for generations. The medieval world, heavy with inherited certainty, started to loosen. The modern world began to inhale. There were discoveries in botany, geology, astronomy, mathematics. There were new instruments, new measurements, new ways of seeing. The act of observation itself became a kind of devotion. Still, observation can be dangerous, because when you look closely, you might see something that contradicts authority, and authorities do not always respond kindly to contradiction. So while artists painted gods and saints, while architects built ordered facades, while composers braided melodies, thinkers began to tug at the seams of the universe. They did it softly, at first, in private notes, in cautious conversations, in books that circulated quietly. A question posed in ink can be sharper than a sword. And if you are drifting now, if your eyelids are heavy, let these thoughts slow down into something calmer. Imagine the Renaissance as a long night of candles, each one a small flame of inquiry, flickering, threatened by drafts, yet persistent. Hear the press stamping paper. Hear the choir rising. Hear the pen scratching as a hand draws the curve of a bone. And feel, underneath it, the steady pulse of a century trying to wake from fear, even while fear, like a shadow, refuses to leave entirely. Because plague had taught Europe that life can vanish fast. That lesson lingered. It made people crave meaning. It made them chase beauty. It made them ask what, if anything, could outlast a body. Some answered with churches and art. Some answered with music. Some answered with anatomy and stars. All of them, in their own ways, were trying to build a kind of shelter against the dark. And in that attempt, they created wonders, and they created tensions that would soon spill beyond any room, beyond any chapel, beyond any printed page. For now, let the sound of polyphony carry you. Let the voices weave around you like warm cloth. Let the candlelight soften the sharper edges of these truths. Breathe in, slowly, breathe out, and let the Renaissance, in all its beauty and shadow, sing you towards sleep. There is a small moment I want to linger on, because it feels so human that it almost hurts. A print shop, early morning. The air is cold enough that your breath comes out in pale clouds, and the windows are fogged from the warmth of bodies working inside. When the door opens, a bell gives a shy little ring. The smell hits you immediately. Damp paper, wood shavings, ink so thick it seems almost alive, and underneath it, all the faint sourness of sweat. Men move carefully among stacks of sheets laid out to dry. Their fingers are stained black. Their nails are rimmed with ink. A boy, maybe 12, carries a tray of freshly pressed pages. He has to hold them perfectly level. If he tilts even a little, the ink might smudge, the notes might blur, and the whole labor of the morning would be wasted. His arms tremble. He keeps his jaw tight, determined. He wants to do well. He wants, perhaps without knowing it, to be part of something bigger than his own small life. That is the secret of the Renaissance, I think. It was built on countless hands like his, hands that never signed their names on a painting, hands that never appeared in a history book, hands that simply held the world steady long enough for genius to happen. If you step deeper into the shop, you can hear the press itself, a slow creak, a heavy thump, then the whisper of paper being lifted, the soft slap as it is placed onto a stack. Over and over, the rhythm repeats. not unlike a heartbeat. If you close your eyes, you could mistake it for something organic. Now, back to the church. Imagine a choir rehearsing at dusk. They are tired. Their feet ache from standing. Their stomachs are half empty. Yet they keep singing, again and again, because the lines must fit together. One singer frowns, listening. Another whispers a correction. Someone clears their throat. A candle gutters as a draft slips through a crack in the stone. There is a moment when they finally get it right. The voices lock into place. The harmony blooms. A few of them smile, surprised, almost shy. For a second, they are not laborers or servants or humble parishioners. They are artists. They are part of a living architecture built from breath. And outside the church, the streets are narrow and dark. A puddle reflects a crooked slice of moon. Someone coughs behind a shuttered window. Somewhere, a bell tolls not for prayer, but for a funeral. The plague may have passed its worst waves, but illness is never truly gone. It lingers in the damp. It waits in the crowd. It reminds everyone, in quiet ways, that bodies are temporary, that knowledge changes the way music sounds. It makes a hymn feel like a rope thrown across an abyss. So yes, the Renaissance sang. Ink, paper, roads, boats, markets, libraries, knowledge spreads, and fear spreads with it. Still, beneath the fear, there is also a softer sound. Curiosity. Curiosity is the candle that does not want to go out. Let that candle sit beside you now. Let it glow gently. Just let the images pass through you like slow clouds, ink-stained hands, stone walls vibrating with song toward sleep. If you notice your thoughts wandering, that is fine. Let them wander the way smoke wanders above the fire, curling, thinning, returning to warmth, slowly, easily, one breath, then another. The song of the Renaissance did not stay inside churches. It slipped out through doors and windows, out into streets where carts rattled over stone, where puddles held small mirrors of the sky, where the smell of baking bread could mingle with the smell of sewage. It traveled with merchants and diplomats. It traveled with letters sealed in wax. It traveled with artists who followed patrons, and with scholars who followed manuscripts, the way moths follow light. And it also traveled with ships. I always find the sea unsettling, honestly, even when it looks calm, because the sea is a surface that hides its depth. It can be smooth as glass one moment and then, with no warning, turn violent enough to erase a life. Perhaps that is why the age of exploration feels so tied to the Renaissance. A time of curiosity, yes, and a time of risk. Picture a port city at dawn. The air tastes of salt. The boards of the docks are wet, darkened by mist. You can hear gulls calling, sharp and lonely, and the creak of ropes under tension. Sailors move like shadows, carrying barrels, checking knots, wiping sleep from their eyes. Their clothes smell of tar and sweat and old smoke. A man spits into the water, watches it vanish, and for a second, his face looks thoughtful, almost tender, as if he is saying goodbye to something he cannot name. Ships are being loaded with supplies, dried meat, hard bread, fresh water in wooden casks, spare sails, tools, small personal charms tucked into pockets. Someone has tied a strip of cloth around a mast as a kind of prayer. Someone else carries a small icon, a painted saint whose eyes seem too calm for the danger ahead. Maps are spread on a table in a nearby office. The inked lines look confident, but you can see the blank spaces at the edges, the places marked with vague shapes, with rumors of coastlines, with monsters drawn in the margins. A map, in this time, is both knowledge and imagination. It is a promise that the world can be held in a human mind, and it is also a confession that the world is larger than any mind. When Columbus sailed in 1492, Europe's sense of the globe began to change. Routes opened, encounters happened, Cultures met in ways that were not always gentle. Here is where the Renaissance shows its darker teeth. Exploration brought wealth to some, and catastrophe to others. It brought new goods, new foods, new stories, and it brought exploitation, conquest, slavery, disease. It is a bitter truth that the same century that painted Venus with luminous skin also trafficked in human bodies like cargo. If that thought feels sharp, let it soften. Let it become distant, like a far-off wave breaking on a shore you cannot see. We are not here to be jolted awake. We are here to understand, quietly, and then to let the understanding dissolve into calm. The Renaissance was never purely golden. It was gold threaded through smoke. Still, the widening of the world changed thinking. When you realize there are lands you never imagined, people who live by different rules, stars that look different from different latitudes, you begin to suspect that the old certainties might be incomplete. And so, while ships moved across oceans, minds moved across ideas. Astronomy shifted. For so long, it had been accepted that the Earth sat still at the center of the universe, and everything else moved around it in neat circles. It is a comforting picture, in a way. It places humans at the center. It makes the cosmos feel like a well-ordered room. Then Copernicus suggested something unsettling. Perhaps the Earth moves. Perhaps we are not the still point. I want you to imagine what it felt like to read that idea for the first time. A scholar sits in a room with a small fire. The window is closed, but cold still presses through the glass. He opens a book. The paper crackles softly. His eyes move over the Latin, careful, precise. As he understands, he pauses. His breath slows. Something in him tilts, like a floor shifting underfoot. Not because the idea is loud. It is quiet. That is what makes it dangerous. A quiet idea can grow in the mind like a seed, and once it has taken root, it changes everything. Soon, others would push the questioning further. Galileo would look through a telescope and see things that did not match the tidy old model. Mountains on the moon, moons around Jupiter, a sky that was not a perfect, smooth dome, but a place with texture, with complexity. Observation became evidence. Evidence became argument. And arguments in this world could become trials, because the Renaissance also lived under the shadow of authority, political, religious, social. The church was not merely a spiritual force. It was an institution with wealth, with bureaucracy, with power to punish. Humanism had encouraged people to think about virtue, about the individual's role in society. It had not necessarily meant to break the church. Yet once people learned to read more widely, once they learned to question, it was hard to stop. Martin Luther, inspired in part by humanist ideals, challenged Catholic teachings. John Calvin followed with his own reforms. People began to talk openly about greed and corruption, indulgences, lavish clerical lifestyles. The sense that salvation had been turned into a transaction. I always imagine the tension of that moment in the body. A crowded church, incense thick in the air. The priest speaks, and his voice echoes. People listen, but some of them are listening differently now. They are thinking, comparing, doubting. A young man shifts his weight. An old woman frowns. A merchant's jaw tightens. Doubt is not dramatic at first. It is a small discomfort, a pebble in a shoe. Then someone prints a pamphlet. Ink again. Paper again. The same technology that spreads music spreads protest. Pamphlets travel from hand to hand, folded into cloaks, hidden under bread, slipped into satchels. People gather in kitchens and back rooms to read. Their faces are lit by firelight. Their fingers tap nervously on the table. Someone whispers, "Is this true?" Someone answers, "It feels true." The church responds, sometimes with debate, sometimes with condemnation, sometimes with violence. Religious conflict would ripple across Europe. Wars, persecutions, divisions, neighbors turning on neighbors, families split by doctrine. The same hunger for truth that made artists paint with new realism also made people certain that they alone possessed the correct path to God. And certainty, when it hardens, can become cruel. Let's step back for a moment and breathe. You are here, in the dark room by the fire. The candle is steady. Your shoulders can soften. The past is only a story now, held at a safe distance. We can also look at how the Renaissance adapted as it spread. In Hungary, for example, the court of King Matthias in Buda became a center of Renaissance culture. There were castles blending Gothic and Renaissance styles. There were gardens, libraries, poets. Scholars came to consult books on philosophy, history, science, medicine. The king's library was enormous, one of the largest collections of secular works on the continent. I like to imagine that library at night. Rows of books, the smell of leather bindings, dust floating in the lantern light like slow snow. A scholar runs a hand along spines, searching for a title. His fingertips feel embossed letters. He pulls a book free, and the sound is soft, a sigh of paper and leather. He opens it, and the pages whisper as they turn. In France, Catherine de' Medici carried Florentine style into the French court after her marriage in 1533. She filled palaces with art and spectacle, with entertainment that helped shape the beginnings of ballet. Court life glittered, and yet court life was also a place of intrigue, of whispered alliances, of poison rumors that drifted like perfume in hallways. Beauty and danger often share the same room. In England, the Renaissance expressed itself in music and literature, then in theater. Shakespeare's plays would one day make audiences laugh and weep, holding up a mirror to human ambition and human folly. In Spain, in Portugal, in the Low Countries, new styles of music and writing spread, each shaped by local taste. And everywhere, the printing press kept churning. It is tempting to think of the Renaissance as a rising sun, but I think it is more like dawn in winter, pale light spreading slowly over a landscape still full of frost. The old world does not vanish when the new world appears. They coexist for a long time, overlapping, arguing. Even living conditions shifted unevenly. After the Black Death, wages and work opportunities improved in some places for lower classes. Yet daily life could still be harsh. Many people remained poor. Many women remained constrained. Many children died young. The grand ideas of humanism did not automatically feed a hungry mouth. Still, the air felt different. Ideas were in circulation. People were learning that the mind could stretch, and that stretching, that reaching, would shape the modern world. If you are still awake, let this be the last image we hold before we let everything blur. A candle on a desk, a book open. Outside, a winter wind pushes against a window pane. Inside, a person reads. Maybe it is a scholar in Florence. Maybe it is a merchant in Antwerp. Maybe it is a young woman in a French palace, secretly practicing steps that will become ballet. Maybe it is a monk wrestling with doubt. Maybe it is an astronomer staring at a star chart. Maybe it is a playwright hearing lines in his head like music. The flame flickers, the page glows, and somewhere, beyond the room, beyond the city, beyond the century, the world keeps turning. Quietly, relentlessly. Whether people believe it or not, let your own world turn towards sleep now. Let the words slow. Let the sea become distant. Let the arguments soften into silence. Breathe in, breathe out, and rest. There is one Florentine night that always returns to me when I think about how quickly beauty can turn to ash. You may have heard of the bonfire of the vanities, when objects associated with luxury were piled and burned under the fervor of religious reform. It is often told as a dramatic scene, crowds shouting, flames roaring. Yet if we step close and slow it down, it becomes something quieter and, in a way, sadder. Imagine the square before the fire is lit. It is late afternoon, the sky already bruised with dusk. The stones underfoot are cold, and if you stand still long enough, you can feel the chill seeping up through your soles. People arrive in clusters. Their footsteps scrape. Cloaks brush against cloaks. You hear murmurs, the soft shifting of many bodies trying to find a place. In the center is a pile, paintings, mirrors, fine fabrics, musical instruments, books, perfumed trinkets, small treasures that once sat in private rooms, catching candlelight, making people feel refined, safe, admired. Now they are stacked awkwardly, as if the objects themselves are embarrassed to be exposed in public. There is tension in the air, thick as smoke that has not yet risen. Some people look fervent, eager, convinced. Others look uneasy, as if they have come because everyone else came, and now they are not sure what they are watching. Then the fire is lit. At first, it is small, a flame licking at straw, a crackle, a quick, bright flare. The heat touches faces nearest the pile, and they lean back instinctively. Smoke begins to curl upward, carrying the scent of burning wood, then burning cloth, then something sharper as varnish and paint. Surrender. The crowd makes a sound, a collective exhale. And somewhere in that moment, I always wonder, what does it feel like to watch beauty burn? Some might have felt righteous relief. Some might have felt grief. Some might have felt both, tangled together. Because even if an object is vain, it can still be dear. The Renaissance was full of contradictions, a hunger for refinement and a hunger for purity, a love of human form and a fear of desire, a devotion to truth and a terror of what truth might do. If the image of fire feels too bright, let it fade. Let it become just a glow, like embers. Let the square empty. Let the smoke thin into the night air. History, too, is like smoke. It rises, drifts, disappears, and yet the scent can linger in a room long after the flame is gone. So when we speak of the Renaissance spreading, we should remember it did not spread like perfume alone. It spread like fire sometimes, fast, hot, unforgiving. And still, even fire eventually becomes ash. Ash settles, silence returns, and in that silence, people keep reading, keep building, keep composing, keep looking up at the stars. Let that be a comforting thought now. Your mind can rest. It can drift. It does not need to burn. It can simply glow softly, like coals. Slowly, the past grows quiet, and you grow quiet with it. The strange thing about a golden age is how much shadow it casts. By the time the Renaissance has traveled beyond Florence, beyond the warm red roofs and the pale river that slides under old bridges, you can feel it stretching like a long evening across Europe. The light reaches everywhere, yes, but it reaches unevenly. Some streets glow, some streets stay dim. Some people stand in the glow and warm their hands. Some people watch from the edges, unsure whether the light is blessing or fire. I always find it easier to understand this century if I imagine a single object passing from hand to hand. A book, not a modern book, clean and bright, but a Renaissance book, thick and slightly uneven, its pages cut by hand, its ink sometimes fading at the edges. The cover smells of leather and smoke. When you open it, the paper has a dry, faintly sweet scent, like pressed plants. Your fingers feel the grain. The pages whisper as they move, a soft rasp, like dry leaves brushing together. That sound, the hush of paper, becomes a quiet soundtrack of the late Renaissance, because the book is no longer trapped in a monastery library, guarded by silence and stone. It is in workshops, in merchant houses, in universities, in courts. It is in the hands of people who are curious, people who are ambitious, people who are angry, people who are afraid. The printing press changed the pace of thought. I know that sentence sounds simple, almost too neat. But if you slow it down, if you sit with it, you can feel how enormous it is. Imagine a print shop in the early morning. The street outside is still cold. A thin mist hangs low, smelling of damp earth and coal smoke. Inside the shop, the air is heavier, warm with human breath and the faint metallic tang of ink. The floor is scattered with tiny scraps of paper, like pale snow. Wooden frames lean against a wall. Type pieces sit in compartments, neat little soldiers of metal. A printer, sleeves rolled up, wipes his hands on a cloth already stained dark. He checks the alignment of the type. His eyes are tired. His shoulders ache. He has done this for hours, day after day. There is no glamour in the labor. The glamour comes later, when the book travels. He pulls the press handle. The wood creaks. The pressure is steady, deliberate, like a slow heartbeat. He releases it, lifts the paper, and there it is. Crisp letters, sharp lines, words repeated with a consistency that hand copying could rarely match. He stacks the pages. He stacks the future. And those pages begin to move. They move into churches, where sermons change tone because people have begun to read scripture themselves. They move into universities, where young scholars argue over ancient texts newly recovered. They move into palaces, where rulers commission translations and keep libraries like trophies. They move into taverns, where pamphlets are read aloud to those who cannot read, and the room grows tense as ideas spread like smoke. A book can feel gentle in your hands. In a crowd, it can feel dangerous. This is part of the late Renaissance that many people prefer to forget, the way we prefer to remember art as pure beauty and architecture as pure harmony. But the truth, honestly, is darker and more complicated. When people begin to question authority, authority does not always respond with calm. Sometimes it responds with prisons, sometimes with trials, sometimes with flames. You can picture a public square at dusk. The cobblestones are slick with old rain. The air smells of wet wool and stale wine. People stand in a loose circle, their faces pale in the fading light. Some look eager, hungry for spectacle. Some look uneasy, shifting their weight, feeling that something sacred is being violated. A pile of books sits in the center. The covers are different colors, different sizes, but together they look like a small city of paper. A torch moves closer. The flame is not dramatic at first. It licks the edge of a page. The page curls, darkens, then brightens. The smell changes. Paper burning has a sharp sweetness that catches in your throat. Smoke rises and clings to clothing. The crowd murmurs, and somewhere, someone thinks, quietly, I should not have read that. Yet somewhere else, another person thinks, quietly, I will read it anyway. This inner split, this divided heartbeat of curiosity and fear, is how the modern world begins to form. Not in one grand declaration, but in 1,000 private moments where a person chooses to look, to question, to doubt. The Renaissance makes looking fashionable. Artists look at bodies, at muscles and bones, at expressions so subtle you can almost feel the thought behind the eyes. Architects look at geometry and proportion, believing that a building can shape a soul. Philosophers look at ancient texts and try to pull wisdom through centuries of dust. Scientists, too, begin to look differently. Leonardo da Vinci, that restless mind, drawing wings and gears, studying how air moves, how water curls, how light falls on skin. I always feel a faint shiver imagining him in a quiet room, candles burning low, leaning over a body in dissection. The smell would have been difficult, no matter how much herbs you burn. There is a heaviness in the air, a mix of human reality and oil smoke. He would have worked carefully, sketching tendons, tracing the map of veins, trying to understand the machinery of life. It is not romantic. It is intimate. It is unsettling. And yet it is also tender in its own way. Because to study the body is to acknowledge that humans are not just symbols in paintings. They are fragile, complex, mortal. That awareness, sharpened by memories of the Black Death, never fully leaves the Renaissance mind. A century earlier, plague had emptied streets, silenced laughter, left homes locked from the inside with bodies within. Even 100 years later, that echo remains, like a faint ringing after a loud bell. It makes people think about death. It makes them wonder what life should be for. Art becomes one answer. Think of Titian, painting stages of life, showing children sleeping, lovers embracing, an old man holding skulls. The image is beautiful, yes, but the beauty is laced with warning. Life is brief. Time runs like water through hands. That message, for a listener at night, can feel oddly calming, because if life is brief, then perhaps you do not need to force yourself to stay awake worrying about everything. Perhaps you can let the worries loosen their grip. Perhaps you can rest. Still, the Renaissance is not only philosophy and painting. It is also music, polyphonic music, voices weaving together, independent melodies meeting, separating, meeting again. It is like conversation turned into sound, like a group of minds moving in harmony. I always imagine a chapel where such music rises. The stone walls are cold, candles flicker, the air smells of wax and incense. A choir begins to sing. One voice enters, then another, until the sound fills the space like warm water filling a basin. You can close your eyes and feel the notes moving through your chest. The music does not shout. It carries you. Composers like Josquin des Prez, Palestrina, William Byrd, each working within their own worlds, their own tensions, their own loyalties. The printing press spreads not only texts but music itself, so a melody written in one city can be sung in another, the notes traveling faster than any singer could walk. And walking, in this era, is still how most people travel. If you want to slow down, imagine a messenger carrying a bundle of papers across a muddy road. His boots sink slightly with each step. The mud clings, heavy, pulling at his feet. His breath is visible in the air. The bundle is wrapped in cloth, tied tight, pressed to his chest to keep it dry. He passes fields where frost lies thin on grass. He passes a farmhouse where smoke rises straight up, a sign of still air. He hears a dog bark in the distance. He hears his own heartbeat, steady, stubborn. He does not know, perhaps, what the papers contain. He only knows he must deliver them. And this is how ideas move, one step at a time. Exploration, too, moves like that, though across oceans rather than fields. Columbus sails west in 1492, and the world map shifts. Portuguese sailors push routes around Africa toward India. Ships creak in salt wind, sails snapping, ropes rubbing, wood groaning as if alive. Men stare at horizons until their eyes burn. They taste salt on their lips constantly. They pray. They curse. They dream of gold. They fear the sea. Travel accounts return to Europe like strange dreams written down. New plants, new animals, new peoples. The Renaissance mind, hungry for knowledge, absorbs these reports, even as the darker truth of colonization and exploitation begins to unfold. It is hard to hold beauty and cruelty in the same hand, yet history insists that we do. Religious change presses in as well. Martin Luther, John Calvin, reformers shaped by humanist ideals, challenging Catholic teachings, criticizing corruption. The idea that salvation might be accessible through faith and personal virtue rather than mediated entirely by clergy. The Bible printed in vernacular languages, breaking down the barrier of Latin. I can almost feel the quiet shock of a person hearing scripture in their own tongue for the first time. Imagine a small church. The benches are rough wood. The air is cold enough that breath shows. A minister reads from a printed page. The words are familiar in meaning, perhaps, but not in sound. They land differently when spoken in the language of the listener's childhood. The listener's throat tightens. Their eyes sting. They feel suddenly close to something vast. They feel, at the same time, afraid. Because closeness to the divine can be comforting. It can also be responsibility. If you can read for yourself, you cannot hide behind ignorance. And so the Renaissance, by encouraging literacy and inquiry, also increases the weight of individual conscience. That weight can be heavy. It can keep a person awake. It can make a person lonely, yet it can also make a person free. And this freedom, this tension, spreads unevenly across Europe, shaped by local cultures and politics. In Hungary, King Matthias in Buda gathers scholars, builds a library that becomes famous. I like to picture that library late at night. The castle around it is quiet, stone cooling after a day of sun. Inside, lamplight pools on tables, books line shelves, their spines dark. A scholar leans over a manuscript, his eyes tired, his fingers stained with ink. Outside, wind moves through a garden, rustling leaves. He turns a page slowly, carefully, as if the sound might wake the city. In France, Catherine de' Medici brings Florentine style to the court. Court entertainment grows elaborate. Dance performances evolve toward ballet. I imagine a hall filled with candlelight, the air warm with many bodies, perfumes mixing, fabrics swishing. A dancer steps forward, feet precise, arms curved, movements controlled. The beauty is dazzling. But behind the curtains, politics lurk. Alliances, rivalries, whispered threats. Even art in a palace is never free from power. In England, literature blossoms. Shakespeare's plays fill theaters. Imagine a crowded playhouse, people pressed close, the smell of sweat and ale. The stage is simple. The language is rich. The audience laughs, gasps, falls silent. They recognize themselves in kings and fools. They see ambition and jealousy and love, and they feel their own hearts exposed. The Renaissance does that. It holds up mirrors, and when people see themselves clearly, they sometimes change. Sometimes they break. Now, in all this movement, in all this expansion, I want to return again to Florence, because Florence is where our story began, and it is still the quiet heartbeat beneath the noise. Picture Florence at night. The streets are narrow, buildings close, stone walls holding the day's warmth just a little longer. A river moves through the city, dark and slow. Somewhere, a bell tolls softly, not urgently, just marking time. A candle glows behind a shutter. A cat slips along a wall, silent. You walk, slowly, through this city of marble and shadow. Your footsteps make small sounds. A tap, a scrape, a pause. You pass the Palazzo Medici, its facade steady and calm, its tripartite design speaking silently of order. You pass Santa Maria Novella, green and white marble patterns like a lullaby for the eyes. You feel the damp air on your cheeks. You smell faint smoke from hearths. You hear distant laughter, then silence. And you think about what this city represents. A wealthy family of bankers, the Medici, using money not only to build private comfort, but to shape public beauty. Cosimo collecting manuscripts, building a library. Lorenzo hosting philosophers and artists, turning his household into a small universe of thought. These choices, these acts of patronage, are part of why the Renaissance becomes possible. But patronage is never purely pure. Money comes from somewhere. Loans, interest, deals, political favors. Families rise and families fall. Behind the marble and the frescoes, there are ledgers, arguments, betrayals, quiet threats. This is the dark edge of the story, the part that makes the beauty feel sharper, because beauty, when it is funded by power, always carries a hint of unease. Yet, I do not want you to hold unease too tightly. Tonight, We are not here to judge the century as a whole. We are here to drift through it, to let its textures and sounds become slow waves, rocking you towards sleep. So let the tension soften now. Let the noisy debates fade into the distance. Let the book in your hands close gently. Feel the cover settle. Feel the silence return. Listen, instead, to smaller things. The slow creak of a wooden floor in a quiet library. The soft scratch of a quill. Then the pause as ink is replenished. The faint rustle of a robe as a scholar shifts in his chair. The distant echo of polyphonic singing, like a memory of sound. The river moving under a bridge, never stopping, never hurrying. History keeps flowing, whether we watch it or not. You do not need to keep watching. You can let your eyelids grow heavy, the way a book's cover grows heavy when it closes. You can let your thoughts become like ink, sinking into paper, spreading, fading, settling. And as the late Renaissance continues, beyond this moment, beyond this room, you can remain here, safe, warm, listening to the quiet language of time. There is a point in every long story where the world begins to feel quiet again, even if the century itself is still loud. I think it happens when you stop trying to carry everything. You stop gripping the names, the dates, the arguments, the grand claims. You stop demanding that the Renaissance explain itself. You let it be what it always was, a human season, full of brilliance and hunger, full of tenderness and cruelty, full of minds waking up while bodies still ache. And then, slowly, your own mind can begin to rest. So tonight, let us wander gently through the last lingering rooms of this era, the rooms where the candles are burning low, the rooms where the echoes of debate have softened into a steady hush. Imagine you are entering a great building, one of those Renaissance spaces designed to calm the eye. The entrance is wide. The stone beneath your feet is cool, smooth in places, rough in others, where thousands of shoes have worn it unevenly. Your steps sound small and respectful, as if the building is listening. The air has a faint smell of old dust, of plaster, of oil. Somewhere, water drips slowly, the sound deep in the structure, like a slow clock. You move forward and notice how the arches rise, how the columns stand with quiet confidence. Corinthian capitals curl like carved leaves. Light falls through a high window and lands on the floor in a pale rectangle. Within that rectangle, dust floats, turning in lazy spirals. It looks almost alive, like a constellation of tiny drifting worlds. If you stand still long enough, you can hear the building breathe. Not literally, of course, but you can feel the way silence fills space. You can feel how architecture was meant to shape the mind. The Renaissance leaders believed that public beauty could encourage virtue, that a harmonious facade could create a harmonious citizen, that order in stone could become order in the soul. It is a lovely idea. It is also an idea that sits beside darker truths, the control of a city by wealthy families, the manipulation of politics, the use of art as reputation, the use of religion as power, the use of knowledge as both liberation and weapon. That double nature is everywhere in history, and perhaps it is why history can feel eerie at night. The past is never only one thing. It is always two things at once. Still, even with its shadows, the Renaissance gives us a kind of gentle inheritance, the permission to reflect. You can see that permission in small scenes, not just in grand paintings. A girl in a merchant household learning to read, tracing letters with her finger. Her brow furrows with concentration. Her lips move silently. A small smile appears when she recognizes a word. The room smells of bread and candle wax. Outside, carts roll over stone. Inside, a mind opens, quietly, like a flower at night. A craftsman measuring wood for a doorframe, using ratios he has learned from new manuals. He squints, adjusts, measures again. His hands are rough, his nails dark with work. He cares about precision. He cares about beauty, even in a door. He is not thinking about Play-Doh. He is thinking about fitting the pieces together. Yet in that careful fitting, the Renaissance lives. A choir singer holding a sheet of printed music. The notes are black, crisp. He inhales. He sings his line, and another voice meets him, and another, until the sound becomes a woven cloth of harmony. The chapel is cold, but the music makes it feel warmer. The singer feels, for a moment, that his voice is part of something larger than himself. That feeling is not only religious, it is human. A painter mixing pigments, grinding them slowly, the mortar and pestle making a soft rasping sound. He adds oil, stirs, watches the color deepen. He thinks about how light will fall on a cheek, how a shadow will curve under a chin, how an eye can look alive. He is making an illusion, yes, but he is also practicing observation, training the mind to see. These are the quiet domestic forms of the Renaissance. Not only the names that become famous, but the habits that spread. Reading, measuring, questioning, looking closely, caring about form. And those habits, once they exist, keep traveling forward. You can feel their forward motion in the late Renaissance debates about the cosmos. For centuries, people had accepted certain models of the universe, the earth at the center, the heavens turning around it. It felt stable. It felt fitting. Humans wanted to believe they were at the center, wanted to believe the universe was arranged with them in mind. Then comes a different idea. Copernicus writes of a sun-centered system. Later thinkers like Galileo look through instruments, see moons around Jupiter, see evidence that unsettles old certainty. I picture Galileo at night, looking up, the cold air biting his fingers, his breath visible. The telescope is a strange object, simple and miraculous. He leans into it. The world narrows to a circle of light. Within that circle, he sees something that does not fit the old story. And when the old story no longer fits, fear enters. Because if the earth is not the center, what else might not be the center? If the universe does not revolve around human comfort, what does that say about our place? These questions can feel terrifying, but they can also feel strangely peaceful if you let them. Because there is relief in accepting that the universe is vast, that we do not need to control it, that we are small and temporary, like dust turning in a shaft of light. And if we are dust, then perhaps we can stop clenching so hard. Perhaps we can release. The Renaissance opens that door. It also opens the door to religious upheaval, to reform, to conflict, to the painful question of who holds authority over truth. You can almost hear the printing presses pounding, producing pamphlets, translations, arguments. You can feel the tension in cities where neighbors begin to suspect neighbors. You can sense the way belief becomes a line that divides families. History is not always gentle, yet we are telling it gently. We are taking the sharp edges and laying them down softly, the way you might place a knife on a table, handle turned away so no one is cut. And as we lay those edges down, we can focus on what remains soothing, the cadence of time, the rhythm of human effort, the steady presence of place. So let us return one last time to Florence. Not Florence at noon, crowded and bright, but Florence in the deep night. The river is black, reflecting only a few points of light. The bridges arch quietly. The stones of the city hold a faint warmth from the day, but the air is cool now. The sky is clear, stars thin and pale. Somewhere a dog barks once, then stops. Somewhere a shutter clicks, closed. Somewhere a person coughs in their sleep. You walk along a street that curves slightly, and your steps make a soft pattern. Step, pause, step, pause. You pass a courtyard. A fountain stands still, water barely moving, the sound a gentle thread. A marble statue catches moonlight, making the carved surface look almost like skin. And you remember what the Renaissance tried to do, to make cities truer and more beautiful by reviving the ideals of antiquity, to collect knowledge not only for curiosity, but for practical shaping of society, to sponsor talent not only for pleasure, but for legacy, to use art as a vehicle for truth, to use beauty as a lure toward virtue. Some of these aims were sincere, some were self-serving. Often they were both at once, braided together like voices in polyphony. Human motives rarely come in pure colors. They come in shades, in mixed tones, in soft contradictions. If you let yourself feel the century that way, it becomes less like a lecture and more like a human room. A room where people talk, laugh, argue, pray, build, paint, love, envy, dream. A room where candles burn down in wax pools and the flame flickers when someone passes too close. Now, as the candles burn lower, you can let yourself drift deeper. You do not need to solve the contradictions. You do not need to decide whether the Renaissance was pure light or partial shadow. You can simply let it be a landscape you have walked through, slowly, quietly, listening to its sounds. And as you leave that landscape, you can carry a small, gentle thought with you. The Renaissance reminds us that minds can awaken. But tonight, your mind does not need to awaken. Tonight, it can soften. It can loosen its grip on questions. It can rest in the knowledge that the past has already happened. The paintings are painted. The books are printed. The buildings stand. The debates have echoed and faded. The century is over, even if its consequences continue. You are here, now, in this quiet room, with the steady warmth of the fire nearby, with the candlelight trembling softly. Listen to the smallest things, the subtle crackle of embers settling, the faint sigh of the room as wood expands and contracts, the slow rhythm of your own breathing, in, out, the calm weight of the blanket on your body, the gentle darkness behind your eyelids. If a thought rises, let it rise like smoke, then let it drift away. If an image appears, let it appear, then let it blur. If a name comes to you, Cosimo, Lorenzo, Michelangelo, Leonardo, Botticelli, Raphael, let it float like a leaf on water, then let it pass. You do not need to hold anything now. The story has carried you this far, and now it can set you down softly, like a book closing after the last page. Rest your jaw, let your shoulders fall, let your hands be still, and when you feel ready, let yourself slip into sleep, the way a city slips into silence after midnight, the way a river slips under a bridge, the way candlelight slips into darkness when the flame finally gives up. Before you go, stay with me for a few more slow breaths, just long enough for the last details to settle. Picture, for a moment, the Medici Bank, not in its glory, not in the public imagination, but in a plain working hour, when the romance drains away and only routine remains. A clerk sits at a table. The room is lit by a small window and a smoky lamp. The clerk's fingers are stained with ink. His knuckles are slightly raw from cold. He leans over a ledger so large it feels like a stone slab, page after page ruled with lines, numbers marching in careful columns. The quill scratches, then pauses, then scratches again. Each number is a small weight. Each sum is a quiet promise. Each loan is a thread that ties one powerful person to another. He does not feel like a villain. He does not feel like a hero. He feels tired. He feels focused. He thinks about his supper. He thinks about whether the ink will freeze in winter. He thinks about the candle burning down too fast. This, too, is the Renaissance, the invisible labor behind visible beauty. And if you follow that thread further, you can imagine the stone workers shaping blocks for a palace wall, their hands chapped, their breath hanging in the air. You can imagine apprentices carrying water, slipping on wet stones, laughing briefly before they remember to be quiet. You can imagine servants polishing a corridor until it shines, then stepping back into shadow as important guests pass by. So much of history is made of people who are never named. When I think about that, I feel something soften in me, a kind of gentle humility, because it means that a life can matter without being famous. A life can be real, full, meaningful, even if it leaves no marble statue behind. And that thought, for sleep, can be comforting. Your own life does not need to be carved in stone to be worthy. Now return again to the library, the one Cosimo's collecting helped inspire, the shelves growing richer as copies of ancient works arrived. Copied and recopied, then printed, then bound. The library at night is one of the quietest places I can imagine. The air is cool and still. The smell is paper, leather, dust, and a faint trace of smoke from the lamps. Shadows between shelves look deep, like narrow alleys. A reader sits alone at a table, head bent, eyes moving slowly along a line of text. Every so often, the reader turns a page. The sound is soft, intimate, like fabric brushing fabric. Outside the window, the city is asleep. Inside, the mind stays awake, but not anxiously. Awake in a steady, gentle way, as if thinking itself as a candle, and the flame does not need to be large to be useful. If you ever lie awake at night with thoughts crowding in, you know how different kinds of wakefulness can feel. There is the frantic kind, where worries run in circles. Then there is this kind, the quiet kind, where a thought arrives, is observed, then allowed to leave. That quiet kind is what we are practicing now. So let your thoughts become like that reader, moving slowly, not rushing, not grasping. Let them read a line, then rest. Let them turn a page, then pause. Let them settle into a rhythm so slow it begins to feel like sleep. Notice how your breath feels in your body. On the inhale, the chest lifts slightly. On the exhale, the body sinks a little deeper. You do not need to force anything. Even the Renaissance, with all its striving, still depended on slow things. Stone being shaped, paint drying, ink setting, ships moving across water, years passing like quiet footsteps. Slow is natural. Slow is safe. And in this slowness, you can let the last images of the era fade like candlelight at the edge of a room. The arches, the marble, the music, the printed pages, the cold streets, the river under the bridge. They can all drift farther away now, like a city seen from a distant hill, lights shrinking, sounds disappearing. All that remains close is the warmth of the fire, the soft darkness, the steady present moment. And in that present moment, you can rest. Good night.